Pharma was a tired and disheartened doctor who ended up transported to a fantasy world after collapsing from overwork. In this new land, he obtained magical abilities that he started using to treat various people while drawing the interest of several beautiful women. When he opened his eyes, he was immediately met by a pink-haired girl staring at him closely and calling him Master Pharma. As he attempted to sit up, a sharp headache struck him. The girl begged him not to move, reminding him that he had been struck by lightning. When he tried to speak, he noticed that his voice no longer resembled that of a tired adult, but that of a child. At that moment, he began to realize that something was seriously off. Looking at his small arms, he hoped that was the only thing that had shrunk, but he lost balance when trying to stand. Despite that, he dragged himself toward the window and confirmed he was no longer in his world. When he looked into the mirror, he was shocked, and the maid nearby asked whether the lightning had damaged his memory. When he questioned who Pharma was, she answered that his name was Pharma de Medicus. He found it strange that the name sounded like that of a pharmacist, and began to accept that he must have died from overwork, especially since everything around him seemed unreal. The young girl reintroduced herself as Charlotte, or Lot if he preferred. When he requested that the bandages be taken off, she hurried away to get everything ready. He noticed strange symbols written on his arm, but they vanished once he rubbed them, leaving him puzzled. As she cleaned the room, Lot noticed a mark on his arm and was amazed, saying it was the divine symbol of Panakthios. He attempted to explain that the mark appeared after being struck, but she instantly began praying and thanking the deity. He assumed she was referring to some god of chaos or fear, but she corrected him, saying that Panakthios was the god of medicine. Realizing he wouldn't get through, he allowed her to explain the fundamentals of life in that house. She told him that his family came from an old noble lineage traditionally associated with the royal pharmacy. His father was both an archduke and the president of the Imperial Academy of Pharmacy, which Pharma found extremely interesting. She pointed out a family portrait showing his father, mother, younger sister Blanche, and older brother Pal, who was currently abroad studying medicine. Lot also mentioned that both Pharma and his brother were recognized as prodigies in pharmaceutical studies and divine arts, explaining with excitement that these divine arts produced miracles through the use of magic. Seeing that Pharma looked puzzled at the mention of magic, Lot began to worry that he had forgotten his training. Still, she reassured him that he was capable of using water-based divine arts. When he asked what would happen if he really had forgotten everything, she replied that he would be stripped of his noble status and cast aside like trash. Later in his room, the fear of becoming homeless pushed him to try recovering his former powers. Following Lot's vague instructions, he managed to visualize the structure of water clearly, and soon his life energy began to glow, eventually releasing streams of water from his hands. In panic, he ran to the window, trying to control the outflow. Once he finally managed to stop it, he heard Lot shouting from the garden that he had watered her. She mentioned that the water felt refreshing and pleasant, though Pharma tried not to think too much about the comment. Back in his room, he was stunned by his ability to summon elements, although he realized he couldn't yet combine them into compounds. He also discovered that his left hand produced substances while the right dissolved them. When he heard Lot approaching, he quickly erased all evidence before she entered. She was thrilled, thinking he had remembered his divine abilities. Then she asked about his medical knowledge and warned him that his father used to give surprise quizzes during meals. She took him to the library, which was full of books he recognized. But after flipping through them, he realized they contained human medical knowledge from centuries earlier. When dinner time came, he sat down and quietly observed his family. They asked about his condition and behaved like a typical magical noble household. During the meal, his father questioned how the georide bomb used in his treatment was made. Pharma explained the ingredients and process in full detail, which pleased his father. He said he was glad the lightning hadn't made Pharma dumber, and informed him that his lessons with Aleliana would resume the next day. When she arrived, she quickly noticed something was off, and commented that he didn't seem as adorable as he used to be. Pharma, however, was more focused on the fact that she appeared to have visual perception problems. She asked if he still remembered how to use divine arts. When he confirmed, she skipped the pharmacology section and went straight to reviewing the core of divine arts. She explained that every noble had a patron god and a matching divine art. His father and brother were connected to Panatheos, while she herself was linked to Hydrotheos. She talked about the 5 attributes of divine arts, which were divided into positive and negative types. Pharma noticed there was also a none attribute. She said it referred to unusual powers not seen in over 3 centuries. When he asked which attribute would allow someone to create any kind of substance, she said such a person would be seen as either a god or a monster. They soon headed to the training room, where she scolded him for forgetting his wand. She explained that wands were used to amplify and control divine powers. That's when Pharma recalled a staff he'd seen in his room earlier. She lent him her wand and asked him to cast a water spear. When he failed, she demonstrated it herself, yelling the name of the spell like a character in an anime. Pharma was amazed. He took the wand and walked toward the lake. After mentally preparing, he attempted the spell, which came out wildly overpowered, resembling a water dragon. The wand slipped from his hand. Aleliana remarked that something had to be off. Without delay, she started examining his body thoroughly, as divine arts typically needed enchantments. She suspected a change in the volume of his divine energy and took out a measuring stick. When he held it, the gauge not only filled but cracked, showing a colorless aura, indicating he had both positive and negative attributes. Upon spotting the Panatheos mark, she warned him to never use that meter around others, not even in front of his father. The lesson ended, and they headed home. On the way, she had trouble seeing. Pharma held her trembling hand and guided her. Eventually, the silence became uncomfortable, so he struck a silly pose and told her to do the same when she lost her glasses. She laughed, tried it, and found it helped her vision. Pharma tried it too, but noticed glowing spots. He took her hand, which was injured, and when she asked how he knew, he said medical conditions glowed blue and turned white once the cause was identified. She was alarmed because, to her knowledge, only Panatheos himself had such powers. She backed away from Pharma, clearly disturbed by the possibility that he might not be human. Things escalated when she realized he had no shadow. Screaming in fear, she begged for her life, promising not to tell anyone. When Pharma reached out to help her up, she fled in terror. The next morning, Pharma's father informed him, handed him a potion and a letter, and instructed he wasn't carrying a wand to calm her down to listen. He explained that Bruno had asked him to deliver a letter and a potion, but Aleliana found it suspicious, convinced it was a trap. He then sincerely asked her to listen, saying he needed her to return as his tutor. Aleliana insisted it wasn't necessary, calling him the reincarnation but her knowledge, as she was the only one capable of helping him control his powers. He emphasized that there were no books on divine arts in the family library. He also made it clear that he wouldn't force her to comply and handed her a bouquet of flowers to thank her for everything she had done. As he walked away, he told her to forget about him if possible. Use the medicine he left behind. The world's pharmaceutical knowledge wasn't. He remembered that Panatheos was a peaceful deity and decided to take a more positive view. The following day, she approached Pharma once again that she would resume her role as his instructor, stating it was her responsibility in case he lost for the powdered medication, which she said worked faster than Bruno's potion. To conduct their training in a safe environment, they traveled staff. He learned that the glowing light disappeared completely when it was treatable, but not permanently fixed. He also examined rare substances that he became so focused on his work that he lost track of time, just like in his previous life, until he finally completed a treatment for Lot's eczema, to each member of the staff. When he asked Lot why the laundress cried after receiving her gift, she explained that commoners never received such attention from noble families. This was unprecedented. The next day, during lunch, the room fell silent, and everyone wore anxious expressions. Bruno revealed that was bothered that such an illness existed even in immune. Observing that Bruno had a cough, Pharma kept his concern to himself and hurried to the lab to make a treatment. The compound he needed was difficult to conjure, and the process required precision. So Pharma mixed the powder into macarons and made her eat them. Still skeptical, she reminded him that Bruno had said there was a book could exist that Bruno hadn't already read. Realizing she had a point, Pharma simply told her to keep it their little secret. Didn't yet exist in this world. Curious about him, Blanche asked questions, and Pharma compared the virus to a ghost to help her understand, which frightened her. As he tended to her, she commented on how much nicer he had become and said, but he told her she still had hope before administering the sedative. Based on everyone's expression, Pharma could tell that they had already seen that might help. Bruno tried to stop him to prevent the family from being embarrassed, and approved the treat's hope. Pharma responded by saying he could take the medicine himself and return to work. Noticed the sacred mark and assumed it was a blessing from Panactheos. Satisfied, Pharma asked, returning to the Empress, Pharma presented the medicine while concealing his face like a cautious surgeon. He had to see, and soon everyone in the room took turns looking through the lens. Pharma explained that he then stated that he would observe her daily for 6 months and even took a dose of the medicine himself to demonstrate its safety. The Empress followed suit. With confidence, Pharma declared that tuberculosis was the recipe in the future once he could make the medicine without relying on magic. Bruno accepted. In the Empress's chamber, she said the medicine was clearly working and her condition was improving. Pharma cautioned her until he left, though no one said it directly. Still, he thanked everyone for their support. Weeks passed, but the pharmacy remained empty. Pharma wondered how to improve things, and Aleliana explained the nobles summoned pharmacists to their homes. People were curious, but no one wanted to be the first to enter. During a staff meeting, Pharma said his main goal was to help the common people, but it felt like the shop was being treated as an asylum. At that, local residents. She read the results like a formal report, and everyone applauded. Half of those surveyed said the rest if Jean was a sailor, but Jean quickly found an excuse to leave. Inside, his mother made a strange hiding. She said they simply wanted to check how he was doing. Bruno asked. The top floor was Pharma's personal lab, where he developed. Pharma had interrupted, saying he didn't want any white powders involved. His wife complained, saying she had stopped using them only because he asked. Bruno explained that, in his experience, women who used such chloride. Bruno added that some women. At that moment, a man burst in asking for help, saying his wife had fainted and was in critical condition. Pharma went. Using his divine eye, he saw no disease, only cuts on her wrists, clear evidence of professional bloodletting. He said she was anemic from losing too much blood. She insisted that the procedure had been done by someone trained. Pharma pointed out the infected wounds and said even after nearly dying, she still wanted to become a doll to win his affection. Her to return in a week. A few days later, Pharma tested a prototype on himself, which gave him an exaggerated appearance. Still, the girls seemed to like the result. Eleliana was concerned about the product's safety, but Pharma reassured her that, unlike Mercury, about it. Step as she listened carefully. Eleliana helped with the final touches, and the young woman looked at her reflection, shocked at how much better she appeared. She began to cry with joy, thanking Pharma for saving her from both ugliness and anemia. The next day, Lot went to the market to promote the new product to other women who struggled with their appearance. They immediately showed interest. Even an elderly woman wanted to try it but admitted she couldn't read. So Lot gave, showing that people were more concerned with beauty than health, but a new problem appeared soon after. Chloe showed up again, frustrated because the new batch of cosmetics had sold out before she could buy any. Pharma made a subsidiary with her family support, offering financing and labor. Pharma opened a cosmetics branch and hired more employees. They worked enthusiastically, motivated by the success after the early. Pharma's family went on vacation to visit the new territory that had been granted to Bruno by the Empress. Once they arrived at the estate, Bruno praised the local administrator for his good work and requested a full report, which began immediately. The city was known for being a major port that connected the empire with other nations, as well as being one of the largest producers of medicinal herbs. As the adults began discussing complicated topics like tax fraud, Bruno noticed Pharma looked out of place and told him to go enjoy the beach. Pharma joined Lot and Blanche, who had built a sandcastle. Blanche wanted to swim, but Pharma reminded everyone that they couldn't swim, which left them frustrated. However, after listening to Blanche beg repeatedly, he gave in. As they headed to the sea, Pharma spotted Eleliana napping under a tree. She woke up and said she wanted to join them in the water. She removed her belt and joined the others in playing, which made Pharma uneasy, hoping things wouldn't get awkward. When she asked if he would come in too, he glanced at Blanche and was reminded of his sister from his previous life. He remembered how they used to play on the beach and how she wished to grow up faster. But she died young. Lost in thought, he was suddenly brought back to reality by screams. Blanche had been swept away by the current. Without thinking, Pharma jumped into the water. While Eleliana was also being pulled by the waves, Blanche had drifted far and was beginning to drown. When Pharma saw her sinking, he screamed her name so loudly that his emblem emitted a bright light and parted the sea, creating a dry path. Eleliana woke up just in time to see Pharma holding back the ocean as he carried Blanche back to the shore. She could only watch in awe. Once things settled, Eleliana asked what he had just done. Pharma replied that it might be a form of negative water magic. Eleliana disagreed, saying that no known magic could nullify water so completely. Not even the salt at the sea bottom remained. Pharma noticed Lot was visibly shaken and was about to blame himself, but Eleliana told him he was amazing for saving Blanche on his own. That night, Pharma reflected on the fact that he had removed the salt from the sea floor, which luckily didn't harm either Blanche or Eleliana. He also realized Lot was pretending not to be scared of him. When she tried to talk to him, he quickly assured her he wouldn't use his powers like that again and that there was no need to be afraid. But Lot said she wasn't scared. She was impressed. She apologized for not going in to save Blanche, saying it had been her duty. Pharma replied that it was natural since she couldn't swim, and when she said she thought of them as family, she burst into tears of joy and ran off. Later that night, word reached the church that a boy had erased part of the ocean in a coastal town. The report had come from an orphan, and the temple almost ignored it, until a priest confirmed traces of divine energy had been detected at the site days later. Hearing this, the temple leader ordered that the boy without a shadow be found and eliminated as a heretic. Back in the capital, business at the pharmacy was better than ever. Eleliana joked that Pharma needed to be careful not to work himself to death again. Pharma noticed some priests acting suspiciously in a corner and walked over to ask what they wanted, but they only gave him cold stares and left. That evening, the staff talked about the strange men. Lot mentioned they didn't buy anything, and Eleliana added that their clothes looked foreign. Lot suggested they alert the guards. That night, the pharmacy knights were switching shifts when a loaded cart crashed through the gates. Upon hearing the news, Bruno was furious and swore to find those responsible. After telling the knight to return to duty, he stopped Pharma from leaving and asked if he had any suspects. Pharma thought of Veyron and the robed men, but decided not to act on impulse. Bruno told him to remain vigilant. At the scene, Cedric told him no one was injured, but the cart filled with waste had damaged the storefront and some of the displayed products. Cedric used a simple divine technique to remove the smell. Later, he informed Pharma that they had moved all critical supplies to the cosmetics branch, which would operate until repairs were done. During the conversation, Old Jean showed up with volunteers to help clean up. Townspeople also came to assist, offering whatever support they could. Sometime afterward, a young woman entered the pharmacy looking distressed and asked for Pharma. When he asked what had happened, she said her father had collapsed from heat stroke and wouldn't wake up. Though he didn't want to leave, everyone urged him to go help. Pharma got on a horse with the young woman and headed for a remote location. Along the way, he considered how to treat dehydration, but before long, the woman vanished, and he found himself surrounded by men dressed in white. The group's leader asked if he was the one responsible for erasing the sea and revealed that they were inquisitors from the Holy Kingdom. This reminded Pharma of what Eleliana had said about the temple's power. She had explained that the temple trained children in divine arts, gave out noble titles, and even selected rulers, placing them at the top of the power structure. The Inquisitors were one of their most feared branches, tasked with eliminating evil spirits and heretics. Pharma remembered Eleliana describing them as unstable elites. The leader introduced himself as Solomon of the Great Temple. Pharma adopted a serious tone. They accused him of being an evil spirit and asked him to surrender, which he did reluctantly, allowing them to cast a binding spell. But it took barely any effort for Pharma to break free. The horsemen surrounded him, and one attacked with fire. Pharma created a barrier and removed the oxygen around the flames to put them out. Another attacker used ice blades, but Pharma blocked them as well. When he tried to reason with them, Solomon gave the order to eliminate him at once. Pharma began to panic as the group launched a coordinated assault from all sides. A massive dust cloud formed but quickly cleared, revealing Pharma standing inside a shield of ice. He then created a huge block of ice, his body glowing. He asked them to stop, explaining that he preferred using his powers to heal rather than to fight. Solomon noticed the mark of Panakthios on him, and, in awe of everything he had done, declared that Pharma was Panakthios himself. Pharma didn't understand what that meant, but Solomon continued, saying he had already received divine punishment when he fell off his horse. Solomon knelt, offering his life in repentance. As he prepared to end his own life, Pharma stopped him just in time. Pharma examined Solomon's injured leg and determined that it needed to be amputated. However, since it glowed red, he chose a reduction treatment instead, and the glow faded, confirming it was the right choice. The next challenge was finding someone skilled enough to perform the operation. Since Pharma was a pharmacist, he considered all options and finally decided to do it himself. He conjured a stone bed and asked the priest to set up a tent. Once everything was ready, he explained the procedure to Solomon. After receiving consent, he changed into proper attire and administered spinal anesthesia. The operation was successful, and afterward, the group that had tried to kill him now revered him as a god. Pharma made one request, that everything they had seen be kept secret. Months later, Solomon, now promoted to bishop, returned to visit Pharma's pharmacy, wearing formal clothing as if celebrating a special occasion. Pharma was surprised that someone who had once led a group of inquisitors now held such a title. Solomon explained that he had endured many trials to become useful to Pharma and declared that he would devote his life to protecting Pharma's secret. This intense devotion made Pharma feel a bit uneasy. He also noticed a number of young boys marching around the pharmacy. Solomon then led him into a room and presented a sacred wand known as the treasure of the guardian god's temple. Solomon explained that this wand possessed all attributes, including healing, and had the ability to transform its shape. Pharma felt unworthy of touching such a sacred relic, but Solomon insisted. When Pharma picked it up, the wand began to glow, impressing everyone, including Eleliana. Pharma tried to hand it to her, but it passed straight through her hand. Solomon explained that the wand originated from another world and could only be held by divine beings who weren't of this world. Pharma picked it up again and asked if the wand could float. Solomon replied that ancient records mentioned this possibility. Pharma tested it, and the wand did indeed begin to hover, leaving both Solomon and Eleliana astonished. Before leaving, Solomon promised that the temple would no longer interfere with Pharma. However, he warned that the incident involving the cart was not their doing and that Pharma still had enemies. He then gave Pharma a talisman designed to suppress divine energy. When Pharma used it, his shadow returned, something that made him happier than even receiving the divine wand. Later, while walking through the city with Blanche and Lot, Pharma thought about how hard it would be to hire new staff. He overheard a customer asking a clerk at another pharmacy why they didn't sell Pharma's products. The clerk replied that Pharma's medicines were unusual and too cheap, which raised doubts. The shop's owner appeared and explained that Pharma's products needed to be approved by the union before they could be sold. Back at his own pharmacy, Pharma had the idea of forming a new union since Von continued to be a problem. He hoped it would succeed, mainly because he didn't want to end up overworking himself again. Eleliana found the idea amusing. Meanwhile, at the pharmacists' union, the members were discussing ways to sabotage Pharma after he had somehow managed to recover from the attack. Von believed that Pharma had only rebuilt his pharmacy using divine powers or his father's wealth. When others in the room started laughing, he reminded them that Pharma's actions were hurting their businesses and that they needed to act. Von issued a ban. No member was to go near Pharma's pharmacy, or they'd lose their license. Later, a desperate man knocked on a doctor's door carrying his unconscious daughter. By coincidence, Pharma was passing by and offered to help. The man hesitated, knowing he was a union member, but decided to accept the offer. They entered Pharma's pharmacy through a side entrance, which the man assumed was for commoners. Once inside, Pharma gave him a mask, making the man realize that Pharma was actively trying to prevent the spread of disease. Pharma began asking basic questions about the girl, her name, age, what she had eaten, surprising the father with his thoroughness. Since the girl was unconscious, Pharma took body measurements. When asked why, he explained that the dosage needed to be calculated precisely. Using his divine eye, Pharma diagnosed her, and despite the man's concern, he said it was just a bad cold. The pharmacist accompanying the man was skeptical, mentioning various symptoms, but Pharma explained that it was a virus-induced cold. Though the man didn't understand the technical terms, he realized the treatment was meant to be inhaled rather than taken orally. Afterward, Pharma allowed them to rest. By evening, the girl's condition had already improved. When Pharma walked them home, the man expected an enormous bill, but was shocked to find it only cost the equivalent of a large loaf of bread. At home, the man's wife was alarmed to hear that he had taken their daughter to Pharma's pharmacy, but he said he had no choice. He went on to praise Pharma, saying that he truly cared about their child. He admitted that, as a pharmacist, he had much to learn from Pharma, but doing so meant defying the union. His wife reminded him of their debts, but she realized he had already made up his mind and began to cry. At the next union meeting, Von angrily declared that he had destroyed all the cosmetics his wife had bought from Pharma. Members whispered among themselves that even Bishop Solomon was visiting the pharmacy now. Von turned to Pierre, whose shop was near Pharma's, and asked what he thought. Pierre took a deep breath and asked if anyone had actually seen Pharma's medicine. No one responded. Pierre said he had gone there and seen it for himself. He said he had received help and that everyone, regardless of class, had been treated equally. The prices were reasonable and the service was real. Von became furious, accusing Pharma of being a demon and insisting that he needed to be eliminated. He claimed a noble had ignored him during a time of need and that his own limited divine powers had forced him to bury his son himself. He called Pharma a threat and said they had to take action. Pierre tried to convince the others to embrace the new methods and not rely on luck and outdated traditions. His speech was persuasive until Von cut him off and threw him out of the meeting. That afternoon, Pharma found Pierre sitting outside his vandalized shop. Pierre explained that he had spoken out against the union and had been punished. He said he would have to leave the country if he wanted to keep working, but Pharma said that wouldn't be necessary. He had just created a new union. He invited Pierre to join, which thrilled him. Pierre reopened his store with some of Pharma's products. As he prepared for the reopening, Marie encouraged him, and he was surprised to find a line of customers already waiting. Years earlier, a medical genius named Camus had been imprisoned by the temple. Despite contributing greatly to the kingdom's medical development, he had performed human experiments. In his final moments, a young Bruno asked him why he had done it. Camus explained that life was a cycle of death and birth, and that his experiments were meant to benefit future generations. As he tried to elaborate, Bruno suddenly woke up from a nightmare during lunch. Pharma noticed that he looked disturbed and asked if something was wrong. Bruno chose not to mention Camus. At that moment, a letter from Powell, Bruno's eldest son, arrived. Bruno read it aloud, announcing that Powell's visit home would be delayed. This disappointed his mother, who had been eagerly waiting. Lot and Blanche began to speak about how brilliant Powell was, noting that Pharma was also amazing. Later, Pharma and Bruno met in the office where Bruno reminded him about the St. Fleuve Fair, a month-long event that attracted merchants from all over the world to the capital. Bruno cautioned Pharma about a troubling matter. An epidemic had recently broken out on an island in a neighboring country. Powell's letter mentioned that over 1,000 colonists had died. Pharma was alarmed and wanted more details. Bruno added that even the research team that collected samples had died, confirming the disease's contagious nature. Though the outbreak had been contained, products from the island were still expected to arrive at the fair, possibly contaminated. To make things worse, they were to be unloaded at the port within Bruno's new jurisdiction. The fact that all information about the epidemic had been destroyed deeply troubled Pharma, as it suggested that the situation was out of control. According to Powell's report, the first researcher had developed a high fever, followed by vomiting, headaches, and swelling of the neck before dying on the 7th day. The second died even faster, with symptoms including skin darkening. Everyone present realized how serious this was. Pharma asked for more details, and Bruno mentioned a new device developed by an unknown person, which was actually Pharma's own microscope. Pharma learned that the researchers had used his microscope and managed to observe the virus. He asked Powell to send the observation notes as soon as possible. Meanwhile, at the royal palace, a meeting was held where it was reported that the kingdom's mortality rate had dropped by more than 20% since Pharma's pharmacy had opened. Everyone acknowledged his positive impact, and the Empress suggested he be rewarded. She considered granting him the title of Archduke, but Mary reminded her that such a title couldn't be given to a minor. During the same meeting, the Empress also wondered if Pharma might be possessed by a higher being and expressed a desire to help him live freely. Back at the pharmacy, Pharma explained the details of the fatal disease to Aleliana. She immediately suggested canceling the fair. Just then, Lot arrived with a letter from Powell. Upon seeing the drawings included, Pharma was visibly shocked. He recognized the microorganism as Yersinia pestis. Pharma instantly ordered staff to quarantine the port and was assured they would move quickly. He and Aleliana then met with Bruno and told him they suspected the disease to be the Black Death. Bruno admitted that after some reading, he had already considered that possibility. Pharma recalled that the bubonic plague had a mortality rate of about 70% in the 17th century. They described the preventive measures they had implemented. Still, Bruno emphasized that if the plague broke out, the empire would fall. There was no known cure. Pharma responded by revealing he had already developed a new medicine and had begun packaging it in case of emergency. While Bruno was impressed by the speed of the response, Pharma stressed that avoiding an outbreak remained the top priority because he was the only one who could currently produce the treatment. They then requested that the Empress personally inspect the shipments at the capital gate. In addition, Pharma asked that all potential disease carriers, like rats and fleas, be exterminated. The Empress acted immediately. Bruno thanked her for the swift action, and she replied that she had complete faith in Pharma. That same day, Pharma showed Pierre the compound microscope he had constructed, explaining that it would reduce the risk of infection through direct contact with the bacteria. He also noted that the medicine had already been packaged and would be distributed for free as necessary. Once preparations were complete, Pharma left the capital in Pierre's care. At the same time, the Empress received an update confirming that the fair preparations were proceeding on schedule, and that the inspection checkpoints were not causing delays. Bishop Solomon had also dispatched priests in case purification was needed. The Empress ordered that news of the epidemic be kept secret to prevent enemies from taking advantage of the chaos. Meanwhile, Aleliana and Pharma were preparing to depart by ship. Seeing Pharma nervous, she tried to encourage him, reminding him that Lot was cheering for him. When they arrived at the port city, they observed ships awaiting inspection and realized how even one contaminated vessel could doom the Empire's prosperity. They met with the advance team, who confirmed that all vessels were now docked and handed over the inspection records. Even ships that had passed inspection had their cargoes purified as a precaution. Pharma and Aleliana joined the inspection team and boarded one ship where they were met by an impatient merchant. They spoke with the ship's doctor, who cooperated fully. After examining the cargo, Pharma found no signs of contamination, though he prescribed vitamin C for the crew's scurvy. On their way to the next ship, the sailors began complaining about the speed of the inspections. The noise grew until Aleliana drew her wand, but the group fell silent when they heard cannon fire from the Imperial Scarlet Navy. It turned out that old Jean was a naval commander. He introduced Pharma as a royal pharmacist and son of an archduke, surprising the crew. Jean warned that any disrespect toward Pharma would result in the ship being sunk. Pharma's crew caught up with Jean, who admitted he just wanted more candy from the pharmacy. His sailors said that since they had started eating Pharma's vitamin candies, no one had experienced scurvy, which pleased Pharma. Even after completing the inspections, Aleliana remained concerned about a possible outbreak and urged everyone to stay alert. Just then, Adam, the acting governor, arrived with a report that several villagers in Estak had died from high fevers. The village was west of the port, and it was believed that sailors had fled there to avoid inspection. The disease was spreading rapidly. Pharma decided to go to the village despite objections. He explained how serious the situation was. Aleliana tried to stop him, but Pharma told her she should take charge instead of complaining, as she had the people and equipment. Activating his divine wand, he flew off at once. While in flight, Pharma lost focus and collided with a bird, nearly falling. He managed to stabilize himself. Almost hitting a tree, he closed his eyes but passed straight through the trunk thanks to the wand's power. When he reached the village, he saw a group of people trying to escape. He begged them to stay, but they refused, terrified of dying. They began to panic, calling him a spirit after seeing him appear from the sky. When they drew weapons, Pharma used the wand to create a dome of ice around the entire village. The people were stunned. He explained that he was a royal pharmacist and showed them his badge. Once they recognized his authority, their fear turned to hope, and they pleaded for help. Pharma then told them that the village would be divided into 3 zones, one for severe cases, one for mild cases, and one for the healthy. Some men misunderstood and thought he planned to kill the infected, but he clarified that the zoning was meant to prioritize those who needed help first. Back at the port, the Navy spotted an unfamiliar ship approaching. Upon examination, they realized it was likely the vessel that had evaded inspection. It was flying flags signaling for help, meaning it was contaminated. As they drew closer, a young lookout reported that everyone on board was dead. Commander Gan decided it would be pointless to board and instead ordered the cannons prepared. Before firing, he remembered Pharma's desire to save everyone, but the ship had ignored inspection. Gan said a prayer and gave the order to fire. Elsewhere, a group of men discussed their shortage of help. A woman volunteered, but they rejected her. She was Professor Black Mold, close to retirement. In her office, her assistant called her Casper, but she replied that she was too old and her research on fungi and microorganisms was now obsolete. Just as she was accepting the end of her career, she received a summons to the president's office. Meanwhile, in a stack, Pharma entered the first isolation center. The men inside asked what a child was doing there, but one of them recognized Pharma, saying he had recently been with Solomon and was actually Panactheos. Pharma confirmed he was in charge and was told that they couldn't tell who was infected and who wasn't. He ordered that everyone receive the medicine, then began examining patients one by one. Using his divine eye, he made diagnoses and saw that when the glow disappeared, treatment had worked. He told one lucky patient that he only had a cold and was free to go. He even used his wand to accelerate healing, but it became clear that he couldn't manage this alone, especially with contaminated cargo still heading toward the capital. After administering treatment, Pharma said they needed to intercept the shipments immediately. At the port, Aleliana and her team finished their inspections, but she still reminded her assistant to stay vigilant. Aleliana felt that Pharma had handled the situation better and wished she could have learned more from him. She admitted to not having special powers, but her assistant disagreed, saying that while Pharma was more accurate, Eleliana worked faster. Grateful for the support, Eleliana thanked her for not treating her like she was useless. At the Institute, President Bruno called Professor Casper to his office and asked about her research. Thinking she was being let go, she thanked him for tolerating her work and prepared to accept her retirement. But Bruno stopped her. He explained that he had an important mission for her. When she asked if it really involved saving the world, Bruno handed her a note with instructions for extracting a medicinal compound from a microorganism. When she asked who had written it, Bruno said that was confidential and just wanted to know if she could do the work. To his surprise, Casper revealed that she had kept a sample of that very microorganism in her lab for years and showed him the culture. She said she thought it was as worthless as she was. Bruno then declared that all resources would now go toward producing the new medicine under her leadership. She promised to do her best. In Estac, Pharma told the village chief that not everyone could be saved, but the mayor still thanked him for keeping the death toll low. Pharma added that to keep everyone safe, they would need to remain inside the ice dome for 2 weeks. Before leaving, he told them not to touch any animals. He also bid farewell to the priest and flew away on his wand. Soon after, Pharma spotted a fire and went down to investigate. He found priests burning a wagon. The captured merchants at the scene refused to speak, but Pharma warned them that the Black Death was already here and insisted they tell the truth. They confessed that they had brought 4 wagons, one of which carried squirrels. They confirmed that the squirrels had come from the same island devastated by the plague, suggesting that they were the ones responsible for spreading the disease. They also revealed that they had been accompanied by 24 workers and 5 holy knights, which raised suspicions. The priests wondered why nobles were involved. With this information, Pharma concluded that the holy knights had deliberately smuggled the epidemic into the empire. He also remembered that the Empress's illness had once been considered intentional, which hinted at a hidden mastermind. The merchants demanded to be treated according to their status. The priest wanted to punish them, but Pharma said he would handle their fate personally. Meanwhile, Bruno informed the Empress about the outbreak, explaining that the escaped crew would likely reach the capital within a day or 2. The Empress immediately ordered her ministers to tighten security at all city gates, though she still debated whether to cancel the fair. The next day, Lot sold protective masks to every merchant she could find. At the capital gate, Pierre received new shipment samples and found one containing traces of Black Death bacteria. Moments later, the area came under attack and the gates were closed. The Holy Knights destroyed the barrier and assaulted the guards. Despite the danger, Pierre rushed to secure the medicine stored nearby. There, he saw the knights releasing a cage filled with white squirrels, vectors of the plague, catapulting them into the capital using wind magic. Upon seeing this, Pierre realized the threat and ordered the guards to sound the alarm immediately. At the palace, it was confirmed that the attackers were holy knights from Netherland. When asked how many there were and the answer was 5, the Empress quietly sat down, shocked that such a small force hadn't been stopped. Bruno theorized that their mission was to spread the disease. The Empress couldn't understand why Netherland would jeopardize their alliance with such a minor strike, especially since their leader had recently died, which ruled out a national action. Bruno suspected that someone else was behind the plot, someone with deep medical knowledge. He suggested that a brilliant pharmacist once exiled for human experimentation, who had his divine powers sealed, was likely responsible. Bruno revealed his name, Camus. He regretted not eliminating him earlier, even though he had always known the man's intentions. Meanwhile, the knights shielded themselves with a wall of ice to block fire attacks, and searched for an opening to retaliate. Before they could act, Solomon arrived and used his divine authority to strip them of their powers, declaring them unworthy. At the same time, Lot, terrified, wanted to help, but Cedric calmed her down. Pharma arrived, climbed the bell tower, and used his divine eye to gauge the infection's reach. He saw the white squirrels still spreading the disease throughout the city. After coming down, he met with Bruno, and together they headed to the interrogation room, where a captured knight was being held. The knight claimed he knew nothing of the Black Death, and insisted he was just following orders. He revealed that Camus had taken control and could kill thousands at once if he wished. He claimed Camus was possessed by a dark spirit. When Bruno entered the room, the night suddenly died. While infected bodies were being burned, Pharma was already thinking about producing more medicine when he sensed something dark above the pharmacy. Lot, having noticed that the alarm had stopped ringing, went to check. Cedric, realizing the doors weren't locked, followed. Lot had already gone upstairs and felt something was off. She was relieved when Cedric arrived, until Camus suddenly appeared and stabbed him before turning on her. Pharma and Bruno rushed to the scene and found both Lot and Cedric injured. Bruno launched an attack to draw Camus' attention, but his ice spells were ineffective. Camus revealed his grotesque face and attacked. Pharma couldn't identify the poison used, so he was forced to guess. Bruno's attacks were blocked, and Camus unleashed brutal strikes. Pharma finally recognized the poison as aconite, but soon realized it was a blend of several poisons. Before he could identify the third, Bruno was badly beaten. Camus pulled out a vial of a deadly chemical and began a twisted speech about how only the strong deserve to survive. Before he could use the substance, Pharma neutralized it and counterattacked. Camus, enraged, lunged at Pharma again, who struck him in the face. Camus tried to persuade Pharma to join him in his plan for mass extermination. Pharma refused and hit him again, this time harder. Pharma delivered a final punch that knocked Camus away and then used his divine wand to exorcise the dark spirit possessing him. A brilliant rainbow light appeared in the sky as the purification took effect. Solomon, seeing the light, knew it symbolized the cleansing of all disease in the air and on the ground. Lot and Cedric regained consciousness. She hugged him from behind, overcome with emotion. After the battle, Pharma and his team treated the remaining infected, while Eleliana successfully prevented an outbreak at the port. Pharma distributed the medicine to everyone as a precaution. Van refused to accept the treatment from Pierre publicly, but secretly gave it to his wife, too proud to admit it openly. 2 months later, the Empress officially declared the Black Death pandemic over. This meant that the parallel world pharmacy could finally reopen. The first to arrive were Old Jean, Bishop Solomon, and many other familiar faces. And with that, the first chapter of this story came to a close. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to see what happens next. See you soon.